In this video, we're going to talk about the fact that when we are dealing with cultural differences, some differences are visible and others are invisible. In my experience, in most organizations in Canada, visible differences are not really the issue. The real issues are invisible differences. So, what do I mean by this? Visible differences, a very simple example would be dress code. If somebody wears a turban, well, that person is very likely to be sick because the turban is one of the symbols of this religion. In most Canadian organizations today, if you wear a turban, your coworkers will not blink. They won't mention anything, right? But many Canadians will remember one organization where wearing a turban created a whole controversy, the RCMP. The whole controversy was, will the Sikh officer be allowed to wear a turban with the uniform? Because, as you all know, the uniform has a special hat, and that's part of the uniform. So the whole discussion went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled yes, he's allowed to wear a turban with the uniform because in Canada, religious beliefs trump the uniform. So that's done, dealt with, no problem. There will be professional situations where wearing a turban will not be allowed. Typically, these are related to safety. If you're going to go on a mine, construction site, any place where you have to wear protective headgear, like a hard hat or a helmet, that in Canada will usually trump the turban. Why? Because safety trumps religious beliefs in Canada. We only have so many Canadians, we can't afford to lose any, okay? So, the point is this, visible differences, because they're visible, have been dealt with. Many Canadians, even if they've never been to Japan, know that if they go to Japan, if they want to greet people, they will bow. And in Japan, you give your business card with 2 hands. You may have never been to Japan, but you know that's what's expected. Why do you know it's expected? Because that's a visible behavior. Any visible behavior, we know we have to adapt to it. So in the workplace, the real issue is not the visible differences, it's the invisible differences. In particular, one that creates a lot of issues, and which most people have experienced quickly if they travel a little bit, is what does being on time mean? If you travel a little bit, you quickly realize that being on time means entirely different things to different people. So, in the workplace, the situation where the difference is absolutely obvious is you have every Tuesday, your team meets at 10 a.m. Until what time can you arrive without feeling the need to apologize because you're late? Well, the answer to that question will depend very much on where you are in the world. So, most of Canada, you'll typically get a 5-minute grace period. Up to 10:05, you're not really late. You can apologize if you want to, but it only becomes socially mandatory at 10:05. If you arrive after 10:05, you have a choice to make. You either apologize or you bring Timbits. Timbits will get you out of that problem. Now, if you work in Vancouver or Victoria, like on the West Coast, typically it's more relaxed there. Up to 10:10, you're on time. If you work in Germany or in Switzerland, the amount of margin you'll get will be about 1 second. When the needle moves from 0 to 1, you're late. And Germans will point that out to you. If you work in Mexico, Jamaica, Nigeria, Venezuela, Argentina, you'll get a lot more margin. So for example, I worked in Mexico for a period of time. I found in northern Mexico, you typically get a 30-minute grace period. In southern Mexico, you get a 45-minute grace period. Southern Mexicans consider northern Mexicans as uptight. It's all relative. So a situation where this created a lot of issues for me was when I worked for P&G. At one point, I was the lead of a team. My team was tasked with designing one single product for Western Europe, North America, and Latin America. So my team had people in Frankfurt, Toronto, and Mexico City. The conference calls initially were no fun. The first call kind of went like this. I'm the chair of the call. 9:58, I open the line. 10 sharp, my German colleagues press the on button and say hi. That is typically the way you start a meeting in Germany. People will go around the room and say hi. Everybody says hi. It sounds like this. Hi, 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 hi. Let's go. Because in Germany, hi is enough chit-chat. Okay, we wasted enough time. So it's 10 a.m. I hear hi from my German colleagues. Let me tell you, first time you hear it, if you're not used to it, it's a real surprise. My reaction, like the typical Canadian team leader, is, hello, this is Lionel. Nice of you to join us. And then I look around the room. I'm still missing 2 Canadians. One arrived at 10:01, one at 10:03, on time by our standards, but not by German standards. And I want to hold off the Germans until it's 10:05, or everybody has joined the call, whichever comes first. So in Canada, how do we hold off people? Well, we chit-chat. And the number one subject for chit-chat is the weather. So I asked my German coworkers, what's the weather like in Frankfurt? The answer I got was something along the lines of, fine. In their tone of voice, it was unmistakable. They were telling me, move on, you're wasting our time. I got their drift, so I started to talk about the project, but I don't want to get into the meat of things until it's 10:05 or everybody has joined the call, whichever comes first. So I talk about the project in general terms. 10:05, what happens? I've got all the Canadians, all the Germans, no Mexican. By my standard, it's time to start. So we start. 10:15, our Mexican colleagues join the call. What happens at that point? Well, we have to start over again. The reaction in Toronto and Frankfurt is, you guys are late. You're not apologizing for being late, and you force us to repeat something we've already discussed. Reaction in Mexico, when they realize we've already started, is, we're on time, and you guys started without us. What kind of a team players are you? So, in other words, on 10:20, everybody's frustrated with everybody else. What do? How do you deal with that situation? Well, my solution, which is the solution that most people will apply if you ask them, if you tell them the story and ask them for a solution, is, well, all right, next time I will send an invite at 10 a.m. for Toronto and Frankfurt, 9:30 for Mexico City. It blew up in my face. My Mexican coworkers found out before the call that I'd given them a different time, and they were all upset. So, what do you do the third time? Well, this is the part I would like all viewers to remember from the story. What I did the third time is this. I organized a conference call to discuss how are we going to run our conference calls. Now, I'm sure you can appreciate that when I was organizing that call, I was not hopeful for our chances of success. How are we going to design a product together if we cannot run a conference call together? I mean, designing a product is a task which is orders of magnitude more complex than running a conference call. But we found a solution. The solution we found was this. We're going to start on the dot, German definition of on time, but we will structure the agenda of our meetings so that the points that are important to the Mexicans are not in the first 20 minutes of the call. In other words, we agreed, well, you guys can be late by up to 20 minutes. We will start without you. We will not get upset when you join the call, even though it's ongoing, as long as you join in the first 20 minutes. We will not repeat what we've discussed. You will read it in the meeting minutes, okay? So this way, nobody gets upset, all right? The biggest thing I did is I made it okay to discuss the rules of engagement in the team. And we had to do this on a regular basis. Like P&G put a fair amount of money on this project, so every 3 months we would all fly together to the same location for like a 2-day meeting. And I made sure that at least 20% of those 2 days was allocated to how are we working together as a team. Because on a regular basis, one group would behave in a way that annoyed at least one, or maybe quite often the other 2 groups, and we needed to discuss what it means. So I'll give you a very simple example of one discussion we had to do. It's this. When you leave a voicemail to someone, or you send them an email, and you don't get a response, how long do you wait before you call them again, or you send them a reminder? Well, the answer to that question was not the same in Mexico City, Toronto, and Frankfurt. In Toronto and Frankfurt, if you left a voicemail and you didn't get a response typically the rule of thumb there was, we'll wait a couple of days. Okay? Obviously, I'm assuming it's a non-urgent matter, because otherwise that skews completely the experiment. But if for a non-urgent matter, I've left a voicemail, I didn't get a response, I'll wait a couple of days before I call the person again. In Mexico, the answer was measured in hours. So the way it played out went like this. We were in Toronto or in Frankfurt. Our cell phone is ringing, and every hour it vibrates. Every hour we get a new voicemail message which sounds like this: "Hi, it's me, call me back." And that's all our Mexican coworkers said: "Hi, it's me, call me back." At the beginning of the day, it sounded like, "Hi, it's me, call me back." At the end of the day, it sounded like, "Hi, it's me, where are you? I really need to talk to you. Call me as soon as you get this message." The sense of urgency kept increasing throughout the day, but they would not give us any of the information that we needed in order to manage their phone calls. We didn't know who me is, what their phone number is, what they wanted to discuss, and most importantly, how long it would take to have that conversation. So, again, this is something we had to discuss as a team. How are we going to manage this situation? So, this is, in my experience, a fundamental element of cultural differences. We end up having to discuss things which normally we can take for granted. If you have a team of only Mexicans, they don't need to discuss how to manage voicemail. If you have a team with only Germans, they don't need to discuss how to manage voicemail. If you have a team with only Canadians, they don't need to discuss how to manage voicemail. But if you have a team with all three, you end up having to discuss something which normally you would take for granted. So this is something we're going to discuss again in another video down the road.